Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is August 15th, not October, August 15th. We are 8 days out from college football being fully underway, and we got a lot to get to. We obviously have gone through all of my predictions for all of the big-time conferences. We'll do a little bit of an update on that on Monday once we get into my playoff predictions and all of that craziness that is going to be really hard to figure out. But I want to take a little bit of a hiatus because there's a number of things that I want to talk about before we get into all of the craziness around everything else, around the playoff and Heisman and all of that fun stuff that I will do on Monday. Today I got to get into some fall camp intel, and we got some quarterback battles that have been decided. Obviously, we're going to start down there in Tuscaloosa. Ty Simpson has won the job over there at Alabama. He will be the starting quarterback for the Crimson Tide going into this season. It started to be a little bit more expected as we get a little bit further down the road. Seemed like he started to separate during fall camp. I picked Austin Mack to win this one early on. I thought throughout spring and then into fall camp, him and his comfortability with Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb especially was going to help him get the edge there. But the way that I see it is if you beat out the guy that I thought was going to win it, I got to feel pretty confident in this guy. Kalen DeBoer knows exactly what he's doing with quarterbacks, not super worried about any decision that he's going to make there. So at the end of the day, I think he's going to be a very solid quarterback. The reality of Kalen DeBoer's offense is if you can hit your spots on time and on target, you're going to throw for about 4,000 yards. You're going to do some really incredible things during your year, and I think Ty Simpson has that ability. I understand he's kind of been talked down a little bit, but this was a former five-star that has all the talent in the world. So although there has been a little bit of talk, and the whole he didn't beat out Jalen Milroe, could he really be that good? I totally understand that argument, and I get where it's coming from. I think we kind of underestimate the tightrope that Kalen DeBoer had to walk last year when you're talking about Nick Saban moving on, a number of guys leaving the portal, one guy coming back in Caden Proctor in this spring portal, and now you have to kind of just keep this thing together. And Jalen Milroe was the leader of that team, point blank period. It's the same argument that I've made a number of times when we're talking about Arch Manning versus Quinn Ewers last year at Texas. That was Quinn Ewers' team. And if you bench Quinn Ewers, I think you have a couple of guys in that locker room that are not too happy. Over at Alabama, it was even more dire. You're in a position where if you bench Jalen Milroe and these guys are not too happy about that decision, you're going to find out in a hurry, and you're going to find out with guys leaving your program, not just guys being upset at practice or not putting in full effort. It's going to be guys leaving your program, and then you're in a much worse spot going into this year than obviously they are now with a number of guys coming back in Deontay Lawson and Justin Jefferson and a number of guys that probably could have portaled out that found their way back like Jeremy Bernard or a possible Ryan Williams. I don't think he was going anywhere, but that was obviously something that he could have done if he very well wanted to. That was Jalen Milroe's team, and benching him I think could have really affected the future of this program. He decided he was going to ride it out with Jalen Milroe the rest of the year. I don't think it was a bad decision. I think Ty Simpson's a really good quarterback, and maybe if you gave Kalen DeBoer some truth serum and told him, or asked him who he would have had if everything was equal, maybe he would have said Ty Simpson. I don't really know. That's definitely up for debate, but I don't think the whole, well, he didn't beat out Jalen Milroe, he can't be a good quarterback thing is a very good argument for a number of reasons, mainly because I think that guy was just so important to that team, and Kalen DeBoer was walking a little bit of a tightrope around that team last year just in terms of not being able to be as assertive as he might like to and make some of the aggressive decisions that he would have liked to. Moving up to Boston College, actually sticking with Alabama just a little bit, the Alabama transfer Dylan Lonergan has won the job over there at Boston College over Grayson James. I think this is the perfect fit for Bill O'Brien's offense, and I don't know if it'll explode this year. I don't necessarily think Boston College is going to be an absolute force this year. Love Lewis Bond. I think they could do some fun stuff this year, no doubt about it, especially with Lonergan at quarterback, but I do think in 2026 he could really put something special together, and maybe this is a dark horse team in the ACC. Maybe they are this year. Maybe I'm overlooking them just a little bit too much right now, but I really do think he could have kind of a Eli Holstein year from last year where plays really good football. Hopefully the injury is not part of that, but plays really good football, shines in some certain moments, and you go into the next year thinking, this might be one of the best quarterbacks in the entire conference. Very talented kid that came from about 20 minutes from me, actually, up there at Brookwood High School. Went over to Alabama, was stuck in a ridiculous quarterback room, and has officially found his way elsewhere with a number of other former Alabama players getting starting roles all over the country this year. Over to Notre Dame, Kenny Minchey might win this job. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy because I thought CJ Carr was kind of going to run away with it, if I'm being totally honest. I thought his passing ability was going to take him over the edge. I maybe still think he is one of the more talented quarterbacks they've had there in quite some time. I thought this was going to be his job, but it sounds like Kenny Minchey is putting up a very, very good fight, maybe even leading in this one. Right now, going into their second scrimmage, I believe tomorrow, that'll decide a lot. There's no doubt about that. One thing we do know about Mike Denbrock, he loves mobile quarterbacks, and it's not to say that CJ Carr is a statue and he absolutely can't move. Kenny Minchey is pretty special with his feet, and I think it's one of those things where do you want to add that factor to the offense? I think regardless of whether or not it's Kenny Minchey or CJ Carr, because CJ Carr could still very well win this job, I think Kenny Minchey is going to play a role in this offense, whether that's red zone pieces or fourth down or short third downs, whatever that looks like. You can't really leave a piece of that offense off the field that could be so important to you. You know, those read options are hugely helpful. They were a year ago with Riley Leonard. If you can unlock that with Kenny Minchey this year, regardless of if he's the starter or not, I think you're going to take advantage of that. And I tend to believe that he's going to win the starting job now. I would have said CJ Carr pretty much every time you asked me up until now. It sounds like Kenny Minchey might just bring a little bit to the table that CJ Carr doesn't quite. And if they're taking care of the ball the same amount in the pass game, I don't see why you wouldn't go with the guy that brings a little dynamic in the run game. So that'll be something to watch. Definitely still very much up for debate. I believe they have 2 more scrimmages to go there, but I think this weekend's going to have a lot to do with who we see in week 1 against Miami. And then Ohio State. It sounds like Julian Sayin might start to inch ahead in this competition finally. I think everyone's kind of been waiting on that moment because this was the presumed starter. Lincoln Kienholz is a very talented kid, another guy kind of like Kenny Minchey, a little bit more running ability, so we could see him regardless of if Julian Sayin is the starter or he's the starter, but I do think it's going to be one of those things like the Notre Dame battle that this scrimmage this weekend is going to do a lot to decide this one. You know, if Julian Sayin comes out there and has a great performance and outplays Lincoln Kienholz, I think it's pretty comfortably his job at that point. If Lincoln Kienholz comes out there and plays really, really comfortably and really kind of takes the job back, that's very much on the table as well. So it's going to be awesome to watch this develop. I think it's one of the more interesting topics of conversation, and Notre Dame and Ohio State don't know who their quarterback is, and they have big-time matchups in week 1. It's going to be fascinating to watch those develop, and we might just know by Monday who those 2 quarterbacks are. If we do, we will definitely talk about that then. Moving forward to more general stuff, Nico Iamaleava is putting on a show down there in UCLA. Early on, it sounds like him and Tino Sunseri are working out very well together as OC and quarterback. I like this kid. I really do think he has unique talent. I understand the noise is going to be crazy, and there's always going to be stuff around that, and a lot of it is well-founded. I'm not necessarily saying you're wrong for criticizing this kid in the way that he went about business this offseason. What I am saying is he's still very talented. There's still a ton of potential that he can unlock, a big-time reason that people were looking at Tennessee saying they can maybe take a big-time step forward this year with him at quarterback. He's a very talented kid, obviously needs to take steps forward when it comes to pushing the ball down the field accurately, but if he can do that, he has a lot of incredible tools, and I don't think UCLA is going to do anything remarkable this year. I do think he ups their potential and ups their ceiling quite a bit. Also, Quasi Gilmer seems to be kind of like the wide receiver to watch around there. If Nico can put it together, then I think this is a team that can make a bowl game and then maybe in 2026 do something a little bit more special in the Big Ten if he can put it all together and obviously keep some of the off-the-field stuff to a minimum. Over at LSU, it sounds like they really like this defense, and that's a scary thing to hear. If you're an LSU fan, I think you love to hear that, obviously, but at the same time, you're thinking in the back of your head, we've heard that quite a few times, and it hasn't quite worked out. But Mansour Deline is someone that is showing out. He is absolutely cornerback 1 right now, is making play after play in fall camp. It sounds like Bernard Gooden is a guy to watch, a USF transfer at defensive line. Very talented kid, absolutely someone that will factor in. And then A.J. Halsey, another guy on the back end, a safety over there from Houston. Very, very good ball skills with this guy, and it sounds like he's making that known very early on. This defense is taking shape the way that you would need it to. Obviously, Harold Perkins is going to come into the mix playing the star position. It sounds like things are going relatively well there, but that's still very much up in the air, as is a lot of stuff around Harold Perkins right about now. You know what you have in Whit Weeks. That's not going to be a question. You know what you have in a couple other guys on this defense, but these transfers are always going to be huge, and those three guys, Deline, Gooden, and Halsey, seem to be kind of the standouts on that defense right now. Obviously, though, they need a little bit more, but any nice news out of the LSU defense, I think, is great news for any LSU fan out there. Also, Nick Anderson, the OU receiver that came over, sounds like he's being very, very incredible during fall camp. He was a great fit for this offense when they picked him up in the portal, and I don't know if he's going to be the number one guy. Aaron Anderson, Barry, and Brown are also doing incredible things, but it does go to show that LSU's wide receiver core is as deep as it gets, and I think those top three guys between Nick Anderson, Barry and Brown, and Aaron Anderson are going to be a really, really special trio. And then just for fun, you have Chris Hilton as well that is playing really, really good football. So if they can put that wide receiver core together, which I think they will, they're going to be more than fine offensively. For defense, they were 53rd last year in points per game allowed. If they get up to number, let's say 27, 23, somewhere in that range, they're going to be a team that can win the national title. I promise you that. And frankly, I think they might jump a little bit higher than that, maybe even into the top 20s, which might be a little bit bold, but I really like what they're doing defensively, really like the groups, and I think Blake Baker can put something pretty special together this year down there in Baton Rouge. Notre Dame wide receiver room looks really good, and obviously that is something that Notre Dame fans have been waiting to hear for quite some time, but Malachi Fields and Will Pauling coming in from Virginia and Wisconsin respectively, huge players, and you're getting great returns early on in camp, especially Will Pauling seems to be the guy that's really showing out there. Jaden Greathouse is someone I love. I really do think he's going to be able to develop into a very, very good talent for them. Jordan Faison, obviously, has been playing a little bit of lacrosse in the offseason, but still a very talented guy that you won't have to rely on as much this year, which is very, very helpful for that room. They're going to need a pass game. There's no doubt about that. When you saw it last year when they were going through the CFP and beating some of those elite teams that people doubted that they could beat, it was a lot because Riley Leonard would make those couple of big-time passes. Jaden Greathouse would make a couple of big-time plays in those games, totally changed the complexion of that offense and opened up the run game just enough for them to have success against a Penn State or have success against a Georgia in some of those big games. It really came down to a couple of big-time passes. They're going to need that this year, and it feels like the wide receiver room is in a much better spot than it was a year ago. For Texas, these injured running backs are coming back very, very strong. CJ Baxter is the one you're going to want to watch very closely. He seems to be ahead of schedule. Obviously, this is not something that they're going to rush. He did have a big-time knee injury a year ago. They are not going to push him back into action until he is fully ready. I can almost promise you that. But it sounds like he seems to be really close to ready. Now, I think there is a world where we see him in week one. We'll probably see him just a little bit. I don't think we'll see a ton of him, if I'm being totally honest. I think they'll try to break him in during that 3-game stretch leading up to the Florida game where you have a little bit of time to get him ready, where he's not getting hit quite as hard by some of these teams. So I do think he's going to take just a little bit of time to get underway, but he seems to be ahead of schedule right now. The earlier they can get him back on the field, this could be a very, very special rush attack. And then Christian Clark was the other one that went down last year during fall camp. He seems to be close to 100%. He did not have as bad of an injury as CJ Baxter. It sounds like he is getting involved pretty early on. He could be used in a number of ways out of the backfield. And if they have all four of those guys healthy, between CJ Baxter, Trey Wisner, Jarrett Gibson, and Christian Clark, they can use all four of those guys in all four different ways. And that's going to be a really, really fun thing for Sark to do. Obviously, he likes to have kind of his bell cow back, but they got options in that backfield, especially if these two guys can come back, get fully healthy, and then get back on the field and have the impact that they're capable of, which for CJ Baxter could be an All-American type impact. And then Conrad Hussey was dismissed from the Florida State football team this past week. It sounds like it came with an altercation between him and a position coach. And it sounds like Conrad Hussey is not remotely the only person to blame in this case. It sounds like the position coach is to blame as well, obviously. But at the end of the day, he has been dismissed from the team. This is a guy they kind of needed. Now, he likely was not going to be a starter on the back end for this team. Played 10 games a year ago. They obviously brought in some transfers on that back end, so he was likely going to be a rotational piece for them. Florida State can't lose anyone. That's the reality of their situation right now. They have to be able to put the best 11 guys on the field. This guy would have been a part of that at certain times. So, a devastating decision for this kid. There's no doubt about that. Absolutely something that could alter the future for this kid. Hope he can get his head on straight. Hope he can find a new place to play and, continue his football career on better terms. But a tough ending to his time at Florida State, and it'll be a really, really interesting thing to watch throughout this season, both for Florida State, how it affects the way they go about business, and where Conrad Hussey officially lands at the end of all this, because he's probably going to have to sit and wait until that winter portal to fully get in, and that's going to be quite a bit of time to wait to play football. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch, just kind of one of those blurbs that came across my Twitter feed that I felt like we had to talk about. Definitely does hurt Florida State's ability on defense and just hurts their variability, just hurts their ability to have a couple of misses and still be pretty successful. Now you probably can't miss on just about anyone on that back end. So a lot of stuff going on in fall camp. A couple of those quarterback battles will be decided this weekend. I think Notre Dame will likely be decided this weekend. Whether or not we get an answer there, I don't know. Ohio State, kind of the exact same thing. I think they're going to know who their guy is by the time Monday rolls around. I don't know if we'll know until they play Texas. But at the end of the day, going to be awesome to watch all of these unfold. I think with those quarterback battles that have been decided, I trust Kalen DeBoer. And if he's picking Ty Simpson, I have no doubts that Ty Simpson is going to be a good quarterback. I think the pickup there at Boston College is one that might not grab national headlines, but in 2026 could be a huge one with Dylan Lonergan up there with Bill O'Brien. But we'll get into all the craziness that happens over the weekend and maybe some more quarterbacks that have been decided on Monday. But let's take our first break, and when we come back, we have an AP poll. We have the AP preseason poll. I want to get into just a full reaction of it, some overrated, underrated teams, and then some national title implications from this AP poll right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about fall camp. A couple of quarterback battles have been decided. A couple others up there in South Bend as well as Columbus have not, and it sounds like they might be this weekend. So we'll obviously give you updates as they come, but let's get into a little bit of an AP poll reaction. This is something, obviously, we've waited on just a little bit with all the predictions that have come out over this week, but definitely wanted to get into this because not only is it a very interesting poll overall, I think it has some really interesting implications overall with a number of different teams. So let's go ahead and just jump into this. Texas is the number one team in the country heading into the season. Not by much. They had 25 of the first place votes. Penn State had 23. So the margins there are very thin. Ohio State got 11 first place votes at number 3. Clemson 4, and they're number 4 in the poll. Georgia got 1 first place vote. They're at number 5. Notre Dame at number 6 didn't get any. But Oregon got 1. Down there at number 7, Oregon did get 1 first place vote, so someone is very, very high on Oregon. But those are your top 7: Texas, Penn State, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, Notre Dame, Oregon, Alabama, LSU, and Miami. Those are your top 10 as of right now. You have Arizona State as the top Big 12 team. Illinois up there at 12, obviously expected to have a big-time year with Luke Altmaier and company. South Carolina, the quarterback kind of precedes itself, a very, very talented quarterback that is expected to do some incredible things. Michigan with that defense is always going to be up here. You got Florida at 15. A lot of people buying into the Gators. SMU at 16 getting a little bit of love with Kevin Jennings coming back. Kansas State comes in as the second team in the Big 12 ranked over there at 17. Then we got a little bit of a run here. We got Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Indiana, and Ole Miss, all teams that are very kind of interesting situations. All of them, except for A&M in certain respects, have kind of new quarterbacks really making their first full year start. Kind of the same thing for A&M, but at the end of the day, going to be a lot of moving parts for these teams. All of those teams want to be in the CFP at the end of the year. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch. You get Iowa State, so we get a ranked matchup in week 0, and we'll talk about that here in a second. And then you got Texas Tech, Tennessee, and Boise State to round this thing out. Obviously, they are factoring in that Nico departure from Tennessee, and seems to be a pretty big marking point for the AP, because I tend to believe they would be somewhere in the 15 range if they had Nico on this roster. Obviously, something that they're holding against them just a little bit. And then Boise State rounds this thing out. I think that's just that was the best group of 5 team last year. Let's just throw them in there at 25, if I'm being totally honest. But you got BYU, Utah, Baylor, Louisville, USC, and Georgia Tech are those teams that are right on the outside, got 50 plus votes. Missouri, Tulane, other teams that got some nice votes. And then you got some weird ones in here. You got Toledo getting a couple of votes, and we'll talk about them on Monday. I promise you that. Liberty gets a couple of votes here. Louisiana Lafayette gets a couple of votes here. So it will be really interesting to see all this develop. Obviously, it only means so much. And I understand the takes on this. I agree with a lot of the takes on the AP poll. Now, what I don't agree with is that we shouldn't have a preseason AP poll. I think we should. I think the reality is if you're upset about it possibly informing a CFP discussion, you're mad at the CFP committee. You're not mad at the AP poll. So maybe just readjust that anger just a little bit. And then overall, I think when you look at this, there's a number of takeaways. There's no doubt about that. But I think the biggest one is Texas over Penn State. They seem to really, really be infatuated with Arch Manning. They seem to fully trust that he is going to hit the ground running. I'll break down my top 25 on Monday, but Texas will not be my number 1 team. I can almost promise you that. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch. That is the top 25 as of right now as we head into the season. And it's going to be a really fun week 1, and we'll get into that here in a second. But a couple of reaction things from this poll. Conference breakdown. SEC has 10 teams in this thing of 16. Big 10 has 6. Big 12, 4. ACC, 3. You have Notre Dame in there, and then obviously Boise State rounds it out for the Mountain West. But everyone's going to cry SEC bias, and I get it. It is a very, very sensitive topic around the world. Obviously, ESPN leans in the SEC's direction because they have a lot of money tied up in the SEC right now, but here's the reality. There's way too many voters for this thing to be totally skewed towards the SEC. Now, do they maybe lean on raw talent maybe a little bit too much? I think that argument can be made, but I think you're going to be hard-pressed to find a way to rank teams in the preseason without looking at raw talent. Raw talent is a hugely important thing in this sport. It's not everything in this sport, but you will find that the past number of teams that have won the national title were among the top 5, 6 most talented teams in the country. Maybe the only exception is Michigan in 23, and they had plenty of talented guys on that team. They just happened to not be 4 or 5 stars coming out of high school. So the reality of the matter is, the SEC has the most teams that should be in this list. Now, should they hold on to their rankings if they lose in week 1? Of course not. They should absolutely drop and be played around with as much as any other conference is. But if you were expecting anything else to happen in the preseason poll than the SEC to get a whole lot of teams ranked, I don't know what to tell you because you were not going to get what you wanted. This is a very, very talented conference. Obviously has a number of teams that are playing at a very high level going into this season. I understand the SEC bias rant. It just doesn't really hold water here. Now, what would hold water is that this could impact the future of the CFP and everything. And frankly, if that's the case and any of those committee members think that way, go ahead and kick them to the curb and we'll restart this committee thing. But that's a topic of conversation for a totally different day. But let's get into some overrated teams as I see it. Illinois. I really like this group. I think it's a really good group. I think they return some really good pieces. Losing Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin is massive, and I think people are sort of underestimating how big of an impact that's going to be. Hudson Clement coming in is a very talented kid. I don't think he can replace what Pat Bryant brought to this team. I think they are good. I don't think they're number 12 in the country good. I probably place them somewhere around 17 to 20, maybe even a little bit lower than that. But I do like this team. I think they have the ability to possibly make a CFP run, just not overly high on the situation going in, especially offensively passing the ball downfield. Then you got South Carolina, another team that I think will be solid, no doubt about that. I think you're losing guys on both sides of the ball that are going to be massive. I think Nick Imamori is a huge, huge piece that we will not know the impact of until they get on the football field. I don't see a wide receiver that is an absolute difference maker right now. I think Nick Harbor could become that, but I haven't seen him become that yet. So I want to see a little bit more from him. I think South Carolina would, again, probably be in my 15 to 20 range in these rankings. And then Michigan. Can anyone tell me what Bryce Underwood's going to be? I don't know what he's going to be. Frankly, I got a little bit caught on Twitter a couple of days ago thinking somehow Jaden Denegal got named the starter over there. He got named the starter at San Diego State where he transferred. So a little bit of misreading from me. But at the end of the day, Bryce Underwood is going to be the starter. I feel very confident in that. Are we sure that he's going to hit? Are we sure that it's going to be as smooth as possible? I think starting at 14 is a little bit crazy. Now, starting at 20, starting at 21 or 22, not crazy at all. I still see the upside on the defensive side of the ball. I really like what Bryce Underwood can bring to this team, but there's just too many unknowns going into the season for me to have them that high. Then underrated teams. Ole Miss is a really good team. There are questions here, no doubt about that. But the talent level is really incredible. I love the wide receiver transfers they brought in with Deshaun Stribling and Deuce Alexander, as well as Harrison Wallace. I think they did a really good job on the defensive side of the ball, especially up front, replacing some of that talent. The back end is a little bit of a worry. There's no doubt about that. And I probably wouldn't bump them up too much from number 21, but still a team that I'd bump up just a little bit. Baylor, they're a top 25 team in my eyes. I think Sawyer Robertson's one of the better quarterbacks you'll find in the entire country, easily top 15 in my mind. I think he is a guy that can lift them in a number of ways. Love what Bryson Washington brings to that run game. And I think Dave Aranda is just not going to have a bad defense 2 years in a row. They were a little bit off last year, well, a lot of it off at times. I think they are going to be a really good team. I understand a little bit of skepticism. I would have them somewhere in that 20 to 25 range in my rankings. And then USC. I think we're doing a little bit of overreacting about USC and Lincoln Riley. With all due respect, I just think it's one of those things where Lincoln Riley struggled. There's no two ways about that, and a lot of that is his fault. I don't think he should have brought Alex Grinch over from Oklahoma to USC. I think it set him back a couple of years, no doubt about it. I think they've made all the right moves, and I think Jaden Maiava, as much as he is a question mark going into the season, I think he has the pieces around him. I think he's more comfortable in this offense. And Lincoln Riley's not going to miss 2 years in a row. I don't know if it's going to be an incredible offense, top 10 in the country or anything. I do know it's going to be a whole lot better, and I think this guy's going to have a lot to do with it. So I understand being skeptical of USC. I really don't understand ranking them 30th in the country going into this year. Most ranked matchups. We got 7 ranked matchups for some teams. LSU, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, and Florida. For 6 ranked matchups, we got Kentucky, Wisconsin just gets torn apart this year when they added Alabama to that schedule. Arkansas and South Carolina. 5 ranked matchups. You got Texas, Syracuse, Texas A&M, Purdue, Vanderbilt, Georgia, Alabama. And I am not going to waste my time rating the 4 and 3 because it's a whole lot of teams that have 4 and 3 ranked games as of right now. It's going to be really, really fun to watch this unfold. Obviously, with as many SEC teams in this thing, you're going to have a lot of ranked matchups for these SEC teams, but going to be really interesting to see how all of this unfolds, and especially that Oklahoma and Florida schedule. We knew it was tough coming in. The AP poll backs that up, and it's going to be a battle for those two teams to find their way up to the top of that conference. Both of them have the talent to do it. One of them, I think, might just be able to. We'll have to find out who it's going to be when that ball officially kicks off. Then we have some kind of fun stats here just to get you a little bit excited for the season or give you a little bit of insight when you're making some bets for the season. And we'll start with the week 1. We get 3 top 10 games, which is absolutely insane. I see 3 ranked games there. It might actually just be 3 ranked games. They just happen to all be top 10 matchups. It is number 1 Texas against number 3 Ohio State, number 4 Clemson against number 9 LSU, and number 6 Notre Dame against number 10 Miami. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be incredible to watch. I have a little bit of a hot take that I'll probably drop next week about these 3 games, but at the end of the day, it's as good as it gets. It is going to be incredible to watch all of that unfold. Obviously, we have plenty of other incredible week 1 games that I cannot wait for, but those are the 3 that take the cake, and they are elite games. Also, you get a top 25 matchup in week 0. Just for fun, you get one to kick off the year. Number 17, Kansas State. Number 22, Iowa State over there in Dublin. I've talked about it before. I think whoever loses this game is not going to be in the Big 12 championship. I think it's hugely important for that, and it's going to be a top 25 matchup. Cannot wait for this thing to kick off. We get rewarded very nicely in that first week. Then week 7, it's incredible in every sense of the word. I believe it's November 1st. I could be blank, or October. I can't remember exactly the date, but regardless, it's an incredible week. Week 7 has 7 ranked matchups as of right now. Obviously, this could change. the matchups are still going to be really fun, regardless of what happens before them. Penn State, Ohio State, Miami, SMU, which is a huge one that we didn't get to see last year. South Carolina, Ole Miss, another great one that I can't wait for. Texas Tech, Kansas State could define the Big 12 this year. Oklahoma, Tennessee, two teams that very much want to be one of those teams in the SEC that makes the CFP this year. Georgia, Florida. Georgia has an incredible win streak against Florida right now. Can Florida take them down? Will DJ Lagway be able to play throughout that game? And then Arizona State, Iowa State, another game that is going to be huge when you talk about the Big 12 rankings. It's going to be a special week, regardless of how it goes for some of these teams leading up to these games. Even if Oklahoma is, 3-2 during this game, and Tennessee is 3-2 as well. It's still going to be a really, really fun matchup between Josh Heupel and his former team. So cannot wait to see all of that unfold. Obviously, we got a little bit of waiting to do, and I'm more than happy to because we got football in between, but that is going to be an incredible, incredible week, much like, I believe, week 7 or week 8 last year. Can't exactly remember what was the off-the-wall weekend, but I think this one's going to be special, no doubt about that. And then probably the biggest one of the bunch when we talk about these stats that you need to know about the preseason AP poll. Every CFP champion has come from the top 6 in the preseason poll. That would include Texas, Penn State, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, and Notre Dame. Those are the teams that would have a shot with this rule in place, would have a shot to win the national title this year. That cuts out Alabama, that cuts out LSU, that cuts out Oregon. That's some 3 teams that fully expect to at least be competing for a national title this year. We'll see if it holds up this year. I think there's a little bit more variability going into this year than maybe some other years in the past, but I also do think this very well could hold up. If you were to tell me you get those 6 teams at the top or the field, I'm probably taking the 6 teams at the top, if I'm being totally honest. The other thing to remember here is the preseason number 1 has not won the title in 19 of the last 21 seasons. Obviously, with a lot of teams vying for that, it's not as crazy, but with only 6 teams in it in the last 10 years or so, it definitely is something to watch. Texas could be in a little bit of trouble here. We'll see if they can kind of buck that trend and get back into the running, but it could just be 5 teams down to, Penn State, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, Notre Dame. Maybe those are your 5 teams you have to choose from, and Texas is in a tough spot, actually, being the number 1 team going into the season. But obviously, all of this is variable. We'll see if those hold up going into next season, but it's going to be awesome to watch all of this develop. The AP poll is, especially the preseason one, is a touchy topic at times in the college football world. I think the reality is if you want it to go away, you're going to be disappointed. It's not going anywhere. I think the biggest thing is to remind people that it is not the end-all be-all. Be able to adjust your opinions, maybe not overreact, but still be able to adjust your opinions throughout the year. If the CFP committee cannot do that, find a new CFP committee. It's really that simple. I get the frustration around preseason polls. I don't necessarily think they're quite as big of a problem as people make them out to be. But at the end of the day, we'll get into all of the craziness that unfolds and the craziness that will unfold with that AP poll. I can almost promise you that. Someone in that top 10 is going to fall all the way out, and we're going to be shocked by it. But at the end of the day, we'll get into all that in time. Let's take our last break, and when we come back, let's just do a little bit of a weekend catch-up. The Michigan punishment has officially dropped, so I want to make sure I get that on the record for you guys. John Mateer saga was a very interesting one. We'll talk about Arch Manning hype for just a little bit and a number of other things right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the AP poll, did a little bit of a reaction, some very interesting stats that come out of that might inform some of your futures that you place here pretty soon. But at the end of the day, let's get into all of the other stuff that happened throughout this week. We obviously were just enamored with making predictions this week, so we got a little bit lost in the sauce, but let's jump into this and let's start and let's talk about what just happened with Michigan. Michigan just got their punishment down from the NCAA with all of the sign stealing scandal. We can officially close the book on the Connor Stallion saga, and as a lot of people assumed, it was a slap on the wrist. It wasn't necessarily this super aggressive, coming down with a hammer that some people thought they might get. The reality was the NCAA was never going to be able to do that, nor would they do that even if they could to a team like Michigan. But that's a totally different conversation for a different time. It sounds like they're going to get a very significant fine, around a $20 million fine, something that they can handle. I can almost promise you that. Now, the bigger thing here is they lose all the postseason football revenue that they would get over the next 2 seasons. So let's say Michigan makes the CFP this year, or let's say they make it next year and they make a bowl game this year. They get none of the money that they would make from that. That is not a huge deal, but definitely something that can affect them going forward. They're obviously going to have to pay quite a bit right up front. Michigan has the money. They're not going to be, absolutely dying because they had to pay $20 million to the NCAA. What they could have to do is be a little bit more economical when it comes to the next recruiting class, and then hopefully by 2027, 2028, they're fully back on track. But maybe it's a little bit of a blip. Anything other than that, I really don't expect from this fine. The other thing is Jerome Moore was given a additional game suspension. It sounds like that's going to be served in 2026, so he likely will not miss week 1. He already is missing week 3 and week 4 because he really wanted to coach against Oklahoma, his former team, which I totally understand, but he likely will not get that the additional ban until 2026, where he'll probably miss the first week of the season. But week 4 and week 3 this season, he will absolutely miss against, I can't remember who week 3 is. I know week 4 is at Nebraska, so that's an absolutely huge one that he's missing, but that was a decision that he was willing to make to be able to coach in Norman for one time. But it is a relative slap on the wrist. There's some other things in here, Connor Stallions has an 8-year show cause, I believe. I tend to believe he should be, eliminated from the sport, but that's a totally different conversation. Jim Harbaugh has a show cause. Again, doesn't matter. He's never going to come back to college football. Did I say Jerome Moore? Jim Harbaugh has a show cause. Doesn't matter for him. He's not coming back to college football. For Jerome Moore, he does have a 2-year show cause. It'll be interesting. I don't think it'll be a huge deal by any means. Show causes have always been something that doesn't really matter at the end of the day. There's obviously some things that could come out during that would be very interesting, but as of right now, it doesn't seem like a huge deal for this program. There are some additional things in there, some little things thrown in there, a little bit more of a fine on specific things. The reality is it was a slap on the wrist. Like many people expected, they weren't going to give him a real postseason ban. They weren't going to, vacate a title in any way, and I don't think it does anything anyway. I think we all saw Michigan lift the trophy. We all know that Michigan won the national championship that year. So I didn't think there was a lot of utility in taking away a title. I think a postseason ban could have been handed down. It probably wasn't going to be for a number of reasons, including because they're Michigan, but at the end of the day, a relative slap on the wrist for this. The one thing I'm a little bit upset about is the Connor Stallions of it all. I tend to believe he should be no longer allowed to be in college football, but that's a personal choice. That's a personal opinion, so I won't necessarily say they're totally wrong for how they've handled this. It'll be interesting to watch this develop. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, something that could impact Jerome Moore's future here, depending on how intense a lot of this stuff becomes, how much stuff comes out with the show cause. But the reality is, it's a slap on the wrist. As long as Michigan can put together a solid season this year, keep Bryce Underwood on that team for 2026, they're going to be totally fine. So it's one of those things that I think all of us understood. It was going to be a relative slap on the wrist at the end of the day, but this officially kind of confirms that. Definitely some things in there that could affect them in the short term. I don't think anything that'll affect them really in the long term here. The John Mateer saga was a relatively short one, but a really weird one for a time. It popped up on X this past couple of days. It sounds like a certain nosy Texas fan got involved in John Mateer's Venmo transactions and had gone back all the way to 2022, I believe, when he was a freshman at Washington State. And there was a transaction that said sports gambling, parentheses, UCLA versus USC. They had played the day before. Obviously, people's ears perked up, and there was a lot of talk going around, could he possibly be suspended for this year? Could there be a full-blown investigation? All that type of stuff. it doesn't sound like anything's going to happen here. I don't really think there's much of a story here. If I'm being totally honest, maybe he did end up betting. He said that he has not bet. He released a statement saying that he has never gambled on sports, that it was an inside joke between him and his friends. Not a great inside joke as far as I'm concerned, but at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like there's going to be much to this. I think he's going to be totally fine. No suspension, no craziness coming for John Mateer. I do think it's something that was just a little bit weird at the end of the day more than anything else. The bigger thing here is make those transactions private, especially if you're a public figure in any way. Do not have your Venmo transactions out for the open if you're really anyone, but especially if you're someone like John Mateer. But I don't think you're going to be able to prove any wrongdoing here. If you were to prove it, it would take an investigation that would cost a lot of money. I don't think they're willing to do that. So I think John Mateer is going to be totally fine. I know Texas fans might love to hear that he gets into a little trouble here, might be suspended for a game or two. He's not going to miss any time. He will be totally fine. This is a relative non-story and something that I think was just kind of a couple of Texas fans getting a little bit overzealous on the timeline this past week. The Arch Manning noise. I wanted to talk about this in a little bit more depth yesterday, but I figured I had a little bit of time here. Paul Feinbaum keeps writing checks that Arch Manning has to cash. And this one, I believe it was, he will be the most dynamic player of a generation. Before, it was the best thing, he's the best thing since Tim Tebow. What are we doing? I think Arch Manning is going to be really good. I think he's going to be an incredible player. I think he's going to be really good this year. I think he could be, incredible in 2026 when he does come back to Texas. He has incredible foundations when it comes to mechanic and work ethic. Obviously, he has a great knowledge of the sport coming from the family he comes from and being as inquisitive as he is as a person. He's incredibly humble, has never stepped out of line, has always said the right thing, been a great teammate, done the things that a lot of people claim they want this sport to be about. Arch Manning is about, and you would think that he is the worst person ever, the way that some people talk about him. Now, I get it. He's the starting quarterback for a team that not a lot of people like. I totally understand that. I also understand that he's a part of a team that has a chance to win a national title. So if you're an Ohio State fan, you're obviously not going to talk glowingly about Arch Manning. If you're an Oklahoma fan, an A&M fan, a Georgia fan, you're not going to talk glowingly about this kid. What I do want to say is, why are we setting him up for failure? Why are we putting him in a position where we are making expectations that we know are a little bit out of the realm of possibility? Now, it's not to say that he couldn't be an incredible player. It's just to saying he's the most dynamic player in a generation that includes Johnny Manziel and includes Cam Newton and includes Tim Tebow is remarkably dangerous for a kid that's about to make his third career start up there in Columbus in 2 weeks now. He's a great player. I think he's going to be an awesome, awesome player. We are setting him up for if he makes one or two mistakes early on in that game against Ohio State, the avalanche of hate that will happen is going to be insane around this kid, and it will come from the same people that are singing his praises right now. I'm not necessarily saying Paul Feinbaum's going to totally change his tune. I'm not calling out Paul Feinbaum as an individual. I'm saying the whole entity around this guy, the talk around this guy, is just dangerous in some respects, because we're putting him on a pedestal that he has not necessarily earned yet, that he very well could earn, but we're putting it way too high. We're not allowing this kid to go out there, to play his game, to make a couple of mistakes, to not bury him while he's making those mistakes, and then let him become the player that he's going to be, which I think is going to be an incredible player. I think is going to be the number 1 overall pick in 2027. That's how good I think this kid is going to be, but let him play football first. Let him do anything first. Let him play a real meaningful football first. Obviously, he played a little bit last year, and he did some incredible things during those games. He also made some big-time mistakes during those games. Let this guy develop, and it feels like they know what they're doing. That's the frustrating part to me. You hype him up to a level that you know he can't meet in his very first year starting. He doesn't meet those crazy expectations that are almost unattainable. You bury him way too early, and then you repeat. And he possibly turns a corner in 2026 and plays incredible football. All of this to say, I know that was a little bit of a rant, but all of this to say, I think he's going to be a great player. I think he's going to do incredible things at Texas. I think he could win a national title, win a Heisman, be the number 1 overall pick in 2027. I think he can do all of that stuff. Let him take the time to do it all. Let him do all of that stuff at the pace that we've let a number of other people do it at. He is going to be a good player. People are writing checks that he might not be able to cash this year, and he might not need to cash for Texas to be a national title contender. So I think he's going to be a great player. I love Arch Manning. I think he's done an incredible job throughout his career. He is someone that we should look at every single time we talk about college football being broken. We should look at guys like Arch Manning and say it's not all the way broken, because he is someone that could have transferred for as much money as you can possibly think of right now. He didn't. He decided to sit behind Quinn Ewers for 2 years, even though everyone was telling him that he was more talented than him. He took his licks, did his work, and now it's his chance to shine. Just let him shine before we start doing all this talk. That's all I ask. I think he's going to be an incredible player, but I also think, in part, I think Paul Feinbaum is doing a little bit too much a little too early. He very well could do it midway through the season. As of right now, just let that guy go out and play football, and then we'll make some opinions about what's happening over there in Austin then. Kansas got a crazy donation this past offseason, or actually very recently, from David Booth, the founder of Dimensional Fund Advertisers, also a Lawrence native. Very, very rich guy, has donated $300 million to the athletic program. I tend to believe this is a direct response to Texas Tech. I think they see what's happening down there with Cody Campbell, and this own rich guy up there in Kansas said, all right, fine, I'll go dollar for dollar with you. And that'll be an interesting thing to watch. Obviously, this is for the entire athletic department, so a lot of it's going to go to basketball. Let's just be totally honest. That's what Kansas is. But it does give you the ability to attack in both sports, be very, very relevant in basketball the way that you want to, while also getting into a little bit better of a place in the football field. So it'll be a really interesting thing to watch. You know, it is directly to the school, so that makes it a little bit more complicated in terms of how you spend that money, how you use it, and how you make it look like NIL money, which is a conversation for another time. But at the end of the day, it's a huge donation to a program that very much needs it. As of right now, it feels like a lot of teams are kind of leaving them in the dust when it comes to the NIL world. They need a little bit of help, and David Booth said, yeah, fine, you can have $300 million. So a huge thing for Kansas, and something that could be hugely impactful for them. John Gruden has talked about possibly coaching in the SEC. He was down in Athens, I believe, early last week, and he was talking about he would, quote-unquote, die to coach in the SEC. This is a very, very good football coach. Obviously had a less than ideal exit to the NFL for a number of different reasons, but he is someone that he knows football. There's no two ways about that. One of the better offensive minds that you're going to find on planet Earth right about now, and he absolutely is someone that I think would do great things in the SEC. He's been around the SEC at different times throughout his career, but not as a head coach, and I think that Arkansas job could come open, and that would be a really interesting one. Florida maybe could come open, and that would be an interesting one. There's a number of jobs in the SEC that I think you would look at. John Gruden at Auburn could be pretty special. I'll just be totally honest, but we'll get into all of that in time. This is just something to watch for the time being. If someone gets fired in the SEC this year, you can bet John Gruden might just have his agent make that call pretty quickly. But that'll be something to watch, no doubt about it. The team that he was tied to before in the SEC was Tennessee, and I actually forgot to put a slide in there, so apologies for that. But Tennessee did sign with Adidas this past week. It is a substantial deal. It sounds like they're going to make about $20 million annually from this deal. Adidas is probably going to lose a little bit of money on this, but at the end of the day, it is a huge thing for Adidas, a very interesting thing for Tennessee. The fans are not super happy for a number of different reasons, and I think the bigger one is they had Adidas jerseys in the past, and they weren't quite as good. Just respectfully to Adidas, I do think Nike has a little bit more clean jerseys, a little bit more clean apparel. Also, the fans want to be wearing the same apparel that the team is wearing. That will obviously change in 2026. But regardless, I promise you, once they start using that money to buy a better roster so they can be a better title contender, the fans will be totally fine. So I think this thing will work itself out. I think Adidas is a more than fine company to sign with if you're Tennessee, but going to be incredible to watch all of this unfold. Obviously, it was a week that was filled with predictions from me. I had to get through all of the conferences before we kicked this thing off, but wanted to get to the Michigan punishment. Obviously, a relative slap on the wrist. Wanted to talk about John Mateer because it's one of the more ridiculous stories that we've talked about, and had to get an Arch Manning rant out just really quickly, but that'll do it for this edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do like, subscribe, comment, do all of that good stuff. Really does help what I do over here. A lot going to happen on Monday. I'm going to drop my Excuse me. I'm going to drop my playoff predictions. I'm going to give you my Heisman winner, a number of other postseason awards. Definitely do my top 25, give you my top 10 group of 5 teams to possibly make the playoff. A number of things coming on Monday. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you then.